Welcome to Party Politics. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, a political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, a political science professor, also here at the University of Houston. It's been a pretty exciting week, actually a lot going on. I hope you checked your garage for documents, making sure that you didn't have anything that was problematic. Okay, as long as you checked, because they're popping up everywhere. We won't spend much time talking about it because obviously, like, there's going to be a whole thing about this, like we predicted. But there's a lot of discussion about these documents. And actually, if you are on TikTok at the University of Texas or at the University of Houston, you can check it out. So we'll talk about that too, in addition to the budget and new committee chairs in the Texas Senate. So a lot going on this week, Jeronimo. But let's start with actually pretty surprising news, and that is that Ron Klain, who's a longtime confidant of Joe Biden and his chief of staff, is stepping down. It's a kind of remarkable moment of turnover in a White House that has had a fair amount of turnover, but is kind of prides itself on having stability in the so-called A team. Mr. Klain is as connected to Biden as just about anybody politically. He's often talked about as the virtual prime minister and has been credited with a bunch of wins in the 2 years that Biden's been in power. So what do you make of his 2 years in office, and what do you make of kind of what it means for the Biden administration at a very critical juncture?
Well, I think, first of all, he had very good wins, right? Yeah. And even after President Biden's lack of popularity, to put it that way.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, okay. No, lack of popularity.
Exactly. He was able to have, a couple of very good bipartisan wins in Congress. Yeah. So that is testament that he's a very good negotiator, that he also has a lot of compromise, or made a lot of compromise with Republicans. Yeah. So I think that he's going to leave a good gap, right? But obviously he must be exhausted.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine?
No, I can't.
Every day, all day. It's like unrelenting.
But it's 24/7.
It is. So, and you know that going in. And I think everybody who's kind of in that level knows it going in. But the amount of work they put in is incredible. And honestly, there's a reason that the A team eventually leaves. And that is because it's so draining, but also because in Washington, credibility is like a block of ice. It loses very quickly, even in kind of moderately cold weather. Right. So that's, I think, part of the reason, too, is that you see a lot of Republicans pushing the Biden administration on these big issues. And although he's got some big wins, there have been some big losses, too, like Afghanistan and the exit from there. So that's been kind of an issue. But I think it comes at a bad time for the Biden White House, because here you are basically right at the cusp of having Republicans investigate your every move, including documents which apparently continue to pop up all over Biden's White House and the residence and his house in Delaware. So you're at the kind of cusp of this breach in charge of Republicans.
But exactly. But I think that's exactly why he might say that's it, and not being able. I mean, he doesn't. Apparently, one of the reasons might be not dealing with this type of mess, right?
Yeah.
And he's just saying that's it. I see it coming. Yeah. I don't want to deal. And now Jeff Zients is going to be the one that apparently has been named as his replacement. Yeah. And boy, I mean, he will have to learn the ropes in 30 seconds because, Republicans in Congress, especially in the House, are full throttle, and they're not going to wait a single second.
Yeah, where's the West Wing streaming? Can we watch that? Is it kind of like Leo McGarry's shortcut, right? The real ones know what I'm talking about, right?
He's going to have to binge watch the West Wing in 1 week.
To get it done. But he's more, the incoming chief of staff is more of a kind of administrator, which I'm not sure what the Biden administration needs, right? I mean, you remember The Godfather, right? You had the kind of wartime and peacetime consigliere, right? I think they need a wartime consigliere, somebody who's willing to punch hard, like Rahm Emanuel, remember, from the first couple of years of the Obama administration. When you need a fighter, you've got to have somebody in that role who can do that. So we'll see. But the Biden administration has actually been pretty solid in terms of turnover. The second-year turnover was about the second highest behind Ronald Reagan's percent turnover, and so it's a kind of a rare event to see this happen. And this is, I think, going to be kind of destabilizing, because one thing that happens when your A team leaves is that scandal sets in. In fact, from like a lot of the work that I do, you can see that when people have this turnover, you start to see these new and unpredicted problems come up. And the first group, the key group, you know kind of what your problems and liabilities are, but with another set of groups, you might not. And so that's a potential moving forward. Not that he's not going to see scandals anyway, because he definitely is, and we've seen them already.
Yep.
So.
And I mean, and especially if President Biden owns another Corvette,
it's even worse. Did somebody check the other Corvette?
Exactly.
Right?
So it's
good question. Yeah,
it's
I think it's smart. You should have been a lawyer. I think you think like a lawyer. So
I mean, and probably he's thinking like, oh, I'm glad I didn't get that truck. Right. Imagine the amount of paper that you can fit into
the
that
paper
truck.
hauling capacity.
Yeah, so.
They don't talk about that in the commercials, but yeah, I can haul a lot of documents.
Oh, yeah.
But speaking of politics and at high level leadership, in an event that actually didn't get, you like the transition? In an event that didn't get like a lot of attention, or hasn't gotten as much attention, and that is that the Republican National Committee is choosing a new chair. This normally wouldn't be that big of an issue, right? The kind of chair of the National Committees tends to be a position that's, kind of heard but not seen. Usually it's very kind of low key. But Ronna McDaniel was and is the current chair. She was sort of handpicked by Donald Trump, but she may have fallen out of favor with Trump and some of the kind of, surprise, surprise, with some of Trump's acolytes. So she is running for essentially re-election.
Right.
The number of the members is limited to 168, but she says she's got about 100. But there are challengers. One challenger is Harmeet Dillon, who is an attorney. She was part of a law firm that backed Donald Trump's attempt to throw out the 2020 election, and a familiar name and face, and that's MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell is running. The likelihood is that the Pillow guy is not going to get enough votes to be competitive. I think it's just people are not sleeping on pillows anymore. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But he's been pretty toxic in lots of ways, and even the Republican Party is not willing to embrace that. But of course, he's pushing everything, as is Trump and a lot of these, kind of Freedom Caucus members to the right. And so Dillon, who is, I think, making a case, number one, that basically she's a better person to run the RNC, more sort of economically minded. She's able to, produce wins where McDaniel has essentially faded, right? Like all of the puffed up aspirations for Republicans in 2022 were kind of lost. They won the House back, but not by big numbers. They didn't win the Senate like they were supposed to. So the concern is that basically the GOP is floundering. Tell us what this means. Like, is this a kind of real sea change in terms of the party? And are we at a point where it's a, can't come back for a moment?
Well, I think, first of all, Family Feud.
Let's play the feud.
Yeah, but it's not.
Right.
It's not that type of Family Feud. It's actually, quite bitter. These leadership, competition, if you want to put it that way. But I think it's very indicative of what's going on within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
We have, the Republican Party is completely divided, right? Well, perhaps not completely divided, but there is a group of, MAGA Republicans that are making a lot of noise. And we have seen that with the election of Kevin McCarthy. We're seeing that in Texas, that we're going to talk in a few moments. And now we're seeing that in the Republican Party. Yeah. So that creates a big problem in terms of unity. Yeah. And unity is needed to win an election. Yeah. And if they cannot provide it, when they go fragmented and have trying to compete in an election, that basically hurts them most of the time. And that's what happened in 2022. But they do not realize it.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, the party's never been good at kind of self-reflection that way. You recall like the autopsy that they did, right, following a kind of disastrous loss in 2008. And nothing really happened from it. Yeah. And so I think that's probably one of the problems that are facing. McDaniel says that, to your point, that she's the unity candidate. She's the one that can bring the party together. She's got the donors. She says they built the ground game. But realistically, it's hard. And, unlike a, say, sports team, right, you can't just kind of fire the coach and to move things along, right? Every Dallas Cowboys fan right now is like, fire Mark McCarthy, right? People watching the game, they know what's going on. Like, it's not, though, totally in control of the chair, right? Like, she only has so much control over how much money gets spent where, right? Everything else is kind of done locally in a decentralized way. The other problem is that you've got Donald Trump. Now, Trump has said he's going to stay out of this race. Like, what? Donald Trump is sitting out a political fight that is all about him anyway?
Yeah.
That's surprising. But for sure, I think it's going to be connected to him. And so I think this will tell us a lot about where things are.
It is 100% connected to former President Trump, 100%, right? I mean, people are calling McDaniel, Ronna is the enemy within. And that's just...
That's not good.
No.
Right? No. You don't want to be there because you're going to get some nasty mail. Nobody likes that.
Yep.
But as you say, actually, this is not just a kind of national Republican Party problem. It's a Texas Republican Party problem, too. It has been for decades. But the latest manifestation of this is that the Republican Party of Texas is raising money and then spending that money on ads against Speaker Phelan. If you haven't been paying attention, or if you're new to Texas or new to politics, Speaker Phelan is also a Republican. You guessed it. And a pretty conservative Republican at that. So this is a strange turn of events, although honestly it's in keeping with the kind of friction that's been happening for the far right to the, I guess you'd say middle, but not even middle, like establishment of the Republican Party for decades. So what's going on here?
Well, I mean, it's very odd, right?
Yeah.
He was elected with 145 votes in the Texas legislature. Having an overwhelming support of the Republican Party, but also the Democrats.
And Democrats,
you know, his opponent had, 3 votes? Something like that? Yeah, 3 votes.
One of which was him, like the opponent, right?
Yeah, but we don't want to say it, right?
Right. Should you vote for yourself in that? It's an age-old problem.
I would vote for myself, absolutely.
I would vote for you, too, but that's 2 votes,
thank you very much.
And he got 3.
Oh, yeah.
So, like,
well, I'm sure that I can find another one.
You get one more vote.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, so that creates, you know, the Republican Party in Texas, to me, at least in this sense, at the House, right, it's quite united in how they want to move forward. The other part is, as you said, that it's very clear. Speaker Phelan delivers. Right? He delivers. And it's not like, you know, part of the war is that please call Speaker Phelan and tell him to stop empowering Democrats. Tell him to listen to the 85% of voters who support banning Democrat chairmanships. Fine.
Right.
But he gave you what you wanted the past session.
You got voting changes. You got abortion restrictions, right? I mean, there's some stuff clearly they didn't get, and that's what they're concerned about, right? I mean, they're saying things like they think that, just like Speaker Strauss before him, that Phelan is preventing some of the kind of core Republican bills from getting to the floor. Maybe that's true, but he runs the House like it's been run for decades, and that's generally on consensus. I mean, that's not to say the Democrats are going to get any big wins, but they're going to be part of that process, and that's been a hallmark of how the state governs for decades, almost a century. So it's not that uncommon. But you do have Republicans pushing back, like Dustin Burrows from Lubbock, you know, tweeted out essentially saying, why are you giving money to the party so the party can run ads against our speaker? This doesn't make any sense. But again, it just highlights how much division there is. But honestly, let me ask you this question. I'm just not sure it really matters. Like, I'm not sure that, except for a kind of small group of our, you know, really smart listeners and watchers, all of them, that people really care about how this goes down, right? First of all, like, nobody cares about the Democratic chairs, right? I mean, it's such a small niche issue for some modest Republicans, right?
About Democratic chairs.
Yeah, exactly, and then I think that mostly beyond that, the voters aren't really concerned about how any of this looks. Like the Civil War, they're like, it's just ephemera, right? They're more concerned about why the Cowboys, you know, can't kick a field goal, right? So, I mean, not to say that, you know, people aren't paying that close of attention.
What was that, 15 interceptions? Something like that?
It's a good number, yeah. We can't speak because we're Texans fans, and so I'm not going to, like, bash the poor Cowboys fans, including my poor struggling parents trying to figure out, like, you know, are they going to be Cowboys fan next year?
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. Okay, we won't dwell into that. But let me ask you a question. Do you think that, you know, these traditional, quote unquote, or the establishment Republicans that are pretty conservative, pretty,
sure.
very, very conservative. It's not talking about rhinos or anything like that. No, these are solid conservatives that deliver.
Yes.
Do you think that they're getting, I guess, exasperated and saying, you know what, enough with these people. Like, we need to get them out because we're not going to be able to go forward. This is creating problems within the electorate because they're just seeing this bickering over and over and over, and that doesn't win votes. People may want conservative politics, but people do not want to have bickering about if a Democrat gets a chair or doesn't get a chair. What they care is about the outcome. So do you think that this might be the first step to, basically telling them either you cooperate with us or you don't cooperate, and then you're out, or you can leave and do your own party, do your own gig, and that's your problem.
We're seeing that to some degree, I think. I mean, the fact that, Tinderhold got 3 votes is a pretty good indication of like where people are, personally on those political questions. Also, for the national level, right, we saw this big fight with over the speaker, and that became like a major problem for Republicans to have to kind of justify how many votes and rounds of votes it was going to take to get just a speaker elected when you have the majority. So I think that we're there. But I also think that this is really just a base priming, right? I mean, this is really a way for the kind of most conservative Republicans to say, these are the things we care about and then our base cares about. Those are the reliable voters, right? And in fact, this week actually 2 bills have been filed that would make basically party like something you had to register for in Texas. And so that'll even more greatly shrink, if it passes, who can vote in these Republican primaries. And they are the most hardcore, right? And that's how you win primaries. And so I think mostly it's about that, right? They're not thinking about the general, they're thinking about the primary.
But again, that would be extremely, extremely generous, right? Because we're seeing, the big, I would say, trend is for people not to align with a political party. So you are having more and more people that self-identify as independents. And therefore, what's going to happen, as you say, and that's very, very bad for, the core Republican constituents, is that they're going to say, I'm not going to vote for these people. And only those people are going to vote. They're going to win. But again, in the general election, I don't think that they're going to be very, very competitive. We saw in 2022. And I think that that's giving an advantage to the Democrats that are just sitting back. And now it's time for unity. And they're just saying like, oh, don't fight. Then fight.
Right. Playing Candy Crush on their phones, right?
Exactly. Like, oh, what's going on?
Ring the bell when it's time to vote. I mean, I think that's right. We actually have seen these proxy wars spill over into other kind of policy domains too. So this week, actually, in both policy news and political news, the regulators of Texas's energy grid have approved an overhaul of the system. Now you know that the governor promised that things were all fixed with the energy grid, and so far, no major catastrophe, right? Although, of course, there are hiccups here and there. But after weeks of deliberation and all kinds of testimony, the commissioners of the PUC settled on a very complex market construction known as a performance credit mechanism. This is actually against the recommendations of their consultant and of the Texas Senate. Critics say basically this new design is going to shift costs onto consumers. Proponents basically say it's going to generate new ability to have reinvestment in the energy grid, so that like these producers are going to have more money and incentive to do this. Almost immediately, Charles Schwartz, the Georgetown Republican and close Patrick ally, pushed back, saying basically that this is not what the Senate told you to do. This is going to be looked at more clearly. So in some ways, this is a kind of proxy war, it seems, between the governor and the lieutenant governor, right? The governor appointed all of these people. This is a brand new reconsideration of the PUC. And then you've got the, Senate run by Patrick, who's got this, kind of team who says we want to do it something different. So this is going to be interesting to see how it kind of shakes out here in a policy chess.
Well, I mean, and I think that this proxy war can be translated into guerrilla urban warfare, right?
Yes.
Because, these performance, whatever you're talking about, that gives quote unquote incentives to private entities on a pretty much unregulated market. It's like, I don't know. It's like, when I'm doing a diet, right? And I have chocolate cake, cookies, ice cream, right? And if I don't have my enforcer right there, someone to regulate my behavior, let's say, a little bit of cake is not going to hurt.
No one hurts.
Boom. Suddenly I look the other way, the cake is gone,
no cake
right?
left.
Do a few sit-ups, something like that,
Yeah,
and then
that'll
that's
fix it, yeah.
But, right, this is what happens. So if there's no stick in terms of the carrot, I don't think that this new scheme is going to work. And the ones that are going to be losing are consumers.
Yeah, and I think that's Patrick's concern. And that fight's been going on, since the kind of last session. And so it's interesting to see it kind of play out. Speaking of Dan Patrick, actually, this week, Senate committee assignments came out. The House will have their committee assignments in a couple of weeks. Now, we know Phelan's already said that he's going to have Democratic chairs, so that's a done deal. How many and where, we don't know yet. But Patrick has jumped the gun, as is usual, actually. They come out earlier. And the surprises here, I think, weren't many, but one is that Bob Hall, who's a very conservative member from North Texas, is going to chair administration, which means he's going to run the local and consent calendar, where a lot of little bills but important bills are. And so this has been where the Freedom Caucus has feasted in the last couple of cycles. And so I think it could be problematic for a lot of these bills that have to get passed. So more bad feelings ahead. Brian Hughes, a Patrick ally, is going to chair State Affairs and Jurisprudence, and Joan Huffman is going to chair Senate Finance and also Special Committee on Redistricting. So there's a lot of kind of action packed into these, and this is, I think, his real leadership team. In a way, though, I'm not sure it matters much, just because Patrick runs the Senate with an iron fist. Remember how they used to say that like Jim Baker was like the iron fist and the velvet glove? There's no velvet glove.
No,
it's not even a pretense of there being.
And he polishes it. I mean, it's like he takes one of those metal polishing and it's like just polish, and then with the machine like.
Do you remember Inspector Gadget, like the claw, right?
Oh yeah,
he had like the spikes on it.
Exactly.
That's a deep dive, but that's what I think when I think of Dan Patrick leadership style. But here's basically Speaker Phelan not relenting to demands to limit Democratic chairs, and you though had Dan Patrick saying we're going to have one chair and it's going to be John Whitmire, and Whitmire is going to leave to run for Senate, so it won't be a permanent thing. I'm interested in this because it has possible ramifications for John Whitmire. Remember in 1990, Bob Bullock did the same thing Patrick did. He said, okay, we're not having any Republican committee chairs. It was a disaster. The Republicans banded together. They slowed everything down. They enforced every minor rule, and it was a real problem. But the next session, he learned and appointed some. And so I think that if the Democrats are looking to do the same thing, they're going to need seasoned legislative hands, which means they need Whitmire to do that. Now, Whitmire's running for a mayor in a pretty Democratic city. Is it going to be a problem for him to have to kind of walk that fine line between what Patrick wants and what the Democrats need in terms of slowing things down? Or is it just kind of Whitmire plays mostly as he has, kind of down the middle, but so friendly with leadership? What do you think's going to happen on that?
Oh, wow.
That's some deep analysis.
Yeah,
there, right?
and right on the spot. So here you go.
Right to you. Yeah, exactly.
Well, let me first give you the regression coefficients.
Gotcha. Okay.
Just run in my head.
I want to hear the coefficient on that. Yeah,
no,
the confidence interval too.
I think Whitmire is one of the most experienced and seasoned politicians in the state of Texas. That's point number one. Period. No one contests that.
Yeah,
I think he knows how to navigate this very fine line.
Yeah,
I think that it could play to his advantage.
Yeah, okay.
And why? Because he has been, saying in all his speeches that, he's willing to negotiate, that he's willing to sit down with the other side, that he has worked on bipartisan legislation, and he goes one or the other.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he's also smart enough to have, people from the Democratic Party, other senators, not in line, but aligned to, have a goal at the end. So not to rush, but be able to, we're going to go there. Let's walk.
Okay.
Let's not run, because this is a marathon.
Yeah.
So I think that it plays to his advantage to have these. And also, he's someone that has the political stature to sit down with Patrick and say it as it is. Yeah. And he's not afraid to also say it as it is outside.
I think that's true, but I think it potentially makes him vulnerable on his left flank. And that's, I think, where he's going to have to shore it up come, running for Houston's mayor. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that, how it plays out.
I vehemently disagree with your analysis.
Wow, okay. That's good.
The fancy word of the week.
Yeah, there you go, yeah. Speaking of vehemently disagreeing.
You cannot copy me.
The big news of the week, at least for budget nerds, is that the House and Senate both unveiled their budgets. Both are maxing about $288 billion. The biggest spending is going to be for property tax relief and for border security. I want to talk about those two because those are the biggest surprises to me. The first is that they are only spending about $15 billion on homeowners' property tax bills, which is, I think, less than assumed. And
right.
I think the impact might be small. The other is about the border. They're giving Greg Abbott $4.5 billion, which is a lot more than they used to. So I'm interested in this. The property tax issue is interesting. They're going to buy down about $3 billion worth of local school property taxes, and they're going to reduce increase the homestead exemption to $70,000. You're talking probably on the order of maybe $300, $400. That's the biggest tax break as promised? I'm not sure. There's also a structural hole in this. At least 1/3 of that $15 billion is going to assure compliance with the 2019 law that reduced the ability for local governments to increase the property tax rates. And so that's one problem. They're going to have to keep paying for this, and that boom money's not going to be there.
Yep.
The other is that without appraisal reform, it's hard to see that this is sustainable. So in the short term, maybe it's okay, but in the long term, it's going to be problematic. So what's your take on that and on kind of border spending?
Well, I mean, we're spending on things that we should not be spending a lot of money. I don't think that, spending $4.6 billion on border security is smart.
Yeah.
Is that something that is going to be sustainable? Absolutely not. What happens to the schools?
Right.
And what happens to the schools? How we schools? So if you're going to decrease property taxes, you also have to have a serious school reform in terms of how public schools are funded. So it's going to be a complete mess. We're going to see it unfold.
It'll play out. Yeah, like this isn't the final version, right? The budget day and night, which I know you and I both love.
This is the first step, as Senator Colhor said. And we still have like 30 more thousand steps to go. So we'll keep an eye next week on it. But this is it for this week.
Well, thanks for watching and listening. I'm Brandon Rottinghaus.
And I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
We'll see you next week.